Welcome back to Nurturing Humboldt, a podcast where we talk about the real experiences of raising young children and supporting families in our community. Today, we're diving into a topic that almost every parent thinks about: screen time. From tablets and phones to TV and gaming, technology is a big part of our daily lives, and many families are wondering how to help their children develop healthy habits around it. How much screen time is actually reasonable? Why do struggles around screen time happen so easily? And how can we teach our kids to use technology in a healthy, responsible, and safe way? To help explore these questions, I'm joined today by two of my colleagues and amazing members of the community, Heidi O'Hannon and Jennifer Mager. Both of them work closely with families in our community and bring a lot of insight and practical experience when it comes to supporting parents and children. In today's conversation, we'll talk about building healthy screen time habits, preventing common challenges, managing conflicts when they come up, and helping kids build a healthy relationship with technology. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Heidi and Jen, thank you both so much for joining me today. I'd love if you guys can say hello and introduce yourself. Maybe we can go ahead and kick off with you, Heidi.
Thank you so much, Karina, for having us. My name is Heidi O'Hannon. I'm the Associate Director of Programs at First 5 Humboldt. I've spent most of my professional life working directly with families through a variety of programs in Humboldt County, supporting parents and caregivers. I've worked with First 5 Humboldt since about 2019, and I've supported a variety of programs and playgroups during my time at First 5. And then outside of that, I'm also a mom of two boys, ages 3 and 5. So things like screen time are something I talk about in my professional life, but also something very relevant and that I'm navigating in my own personal life at home. So grateful to be here today.
Thank you, Heidi. I'm sure you are a very familiar face to many of our listeners, and I can't wait to see what tips you have for us. And somebody else who's very familiar here in the community is Jennifer. Jen, hello.
Hey, Karina, thank you, yes, for having us. My name is Jennifer Mager. I am currently the interim project director for a program called Welcome Baby Pathways to Resilience. I'm also one of the Triple P trainers here, as Heidi is as well. For the last many years, I have worked both at First 5 Humboldt, but also within the Child Development Department at Cal Poly Humboldt. Like Heidi, I'm also a parent of three kiddos. The oldest is finishing up playing baseball at Shasta College. The middle one is graduating from high school, and the youngest is 10. And so we definitely have different kinds of screen time type conversations, and they've evolved over the years as my kids have gotten older and technology has gotten more advanced. But so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jen. And I don't know if you guys could hear, but my colleagues here are very humble, but they are both full of so much wisdom and knowledge, and I'm so glad I get to tap into it today. So we'll go ahead and just jump right in because I know this topic is on the minds of so many folks. Now, Jen, I'll start with you. We're going to talk about a reasonable amount of screen time. Now, you mentioned you have different kids, different ages. So what do experts recommend for younger versus older kids?
Got it. It is a good question, and it is changing over time. Fortunately, we do have guidance from organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics. Their recommendations focus on both age and balance. So it's not always necessarily a time limit as much as it is looking at the bigger picture. They do say, though, for infants younger than 18 months, really avoiding that screen media, unless it's something like, FaceTime or Zooming with family members. But really, babies learn best through face-to-face interaction, play, and exploring their environment. For toddlers between 18 and 24 months, screens can be introduced carefully, but the recommendation is really to choose high quality educational content, watching it together with your child, so that you can help them make sense of what they're seeing. They're sense making creatures when they're little. So being there with them as they're experiencing that. Kids 2 to 5, really no more than 1 hour a day of high quality programming. Again, though, with you there with them, parent, caregiver with you with them. For older kids, though, the AAP has really come away from time limits. They have found that not to be an effective strategy, but instead focusing on making sure that screen time isn't replacing important things such as sleep, physical activity, homework, family time, social interaction. The big idea is that screens really should fit into a balanced lifestyle rather than dominate it.
I really appreciate you saying that because I think there's so much shame around these conversations, but I think like finding balance and also just being aware of what is being watched like goes such a long way. Do you have any recommendations for like littles and like what is on the screen?
The quality and the quantity both really do matter a lot. If you have a child who's spending a couple of hours engaging in some type of creative play, or they're making something, they're coding for older kids. It's different than just mindless scrolling. So the quality really is important. So making sure, if we're looking at younger kids, really helping them identify with your support about what is high quality educational and age appropriate. Um, Quantity is still important because time is limited in a child's day. If screens start replacing things like reading and play, creative activities, problems do tend to appear. And so really thinking about both the quality and the quantity. It's a balancing act for all of us, and it's changing day by day.
That is such a good thing to highlight that quality is more important than the quantity, or something more to, focus on. So just a big reminder for all of our caregivers out there that, it's important to see what your kids are watching and what they're into. And it's also a great place for conversation and connection, because I know that sometimes kids will be interested in something, and if you take a moment to connect with them about what they're watching, even if it's not your cup of tea, it might be a really great place, especially as they get older, for you guys to connect. Now, Heidi, why do screen time struggles happen? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of ways we can go about this conversation, but can you talk to us maybe a little bit more in depth about why screens are so hard for kids to turn off?
Sure. And you're right, Karina. The answer can be a little complex. There's a lot of layers to it, obviously, and depending on what they're watching and the ages of our kiddos. But part of it really is simply how digital media is designed. So many apps, games, and platforms are intentionally built to keep users engaged as long as possible. So they use things like rewards, levels, notifications, and autoplay features that make stopping feel difficult. For kids whose self-control skills are still developing, that can be especially challenging. So when we think about our littlest littles, that 2 to 5 age range, we know that they're going to be more vulnerable maybe to some of those tactics, and their ability to self-regulate and have that internal dialogue of, I need to stop this. That's going to be more challenging for them to have. So it makes sense that it can be a lot harder for our little ones. But at the same time, screens can be highly stimulating. So bright colors, fast pacing, and interactive features can make digital experiences feel more exciting than everyday activities like homework or chores. So we also, we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but you want to really think about that when we see meltdowns, when the screens are being put away. That gives a little bit of insight as to why, digital media these days are designed to really keep people engaged. And so that transition from super fast paced, fast dopamine hits to regular life can be a really intense transition, especially for our youngest children. So keeping that in mind, and that they really need support through that.
I like the way that we're framing this too, because it brings language to things that maybe we already know but aren't actively thinking about. Like, why is this so addictive? What is happening to the brain?
It's a good question. So,
So many things.
and it's a good question because that's really what we need to be thinking about, right? It's not that I think it in the day-to-day kind of rush of things, it can be easy for this screen times and those transitions to cause a lot of frustration. But if we really dig down deep and realizing that the impacts are happening at a biological and physiological, level for our kiddos, and kind of have some understanding around that, I think it can help. Um, But when children play games or watch exciting content, the brain actually releases dopamine, which is a chemical that's associated with pleasure and motivation. And dopamine isn't bad, it's part of how we learn and feel enjoyment. But it can make activities feel very rewarding. And then obviously that encourages us to keep doing them. So for children, the parts of the brain responsible for impulse control and long-term decision making are still developing. And that means that they often need help from us as their, the adults and caregivers in their lives to set limits and help them and support them transition away from screens.
Thank you, Heidi. When families are constantly fighting about screens, what's usually underneath that? What do you think is actually going on there?
I think that's a really good question. I think really the conflict is usually less about the technology and the screen itself and more about independence, communication, and family expectations. So I think with our littles, they may feel that the screens are one area that they have a sense of control, or especially for our older kiddos, a social, the social connection with friends. Whereas us as caregivers, we are worried more about like safety, sleep, mental health, lost family time, those types of things. So when there hasn't been a family discussion where expectations have been clearly discussed, lined out, and it's been defined when screens are allowed or when devices are appropriate or able to be used, the screen becomes a symbol of that sort of struggle and power struggle. So I think that's between our last conversation about that reward cycle can be really hard to break. And it can also be a sense of control in a world that children have very little control over. And so when you combine those two things, it's really understandable, and it's going to happen that there's going to be some conflict and some struggle there.
Yeah. I feel like topic of independence versus safety, I mean, it crosses over into so many things. Jen, how do we prevent these problems? If we know that there's this battle of independence versus safety, how can parents set healthy habits from the start?
I think you just said it. You said healthy habits from the start, like that. That's what you do. I think understanding the why. I think understanding that the habits that you set when children are young influence their behavior as they get older. As we know, being a parent or a caregiver of a teenager, it's much more difficult to establish healthy patterns later. Not impossible. You can absolutely do it. And I encourage you to do it. But if you have the opportunity, if you are parenting younger children, this is a great place to start, because specific to screens, you are influencing kind of their lifelong relationship with technology and how they interact with it. So setting expectations early, if you are finding yourself at a crossroads of introducing more screen time or a new device, that is a great time to sort of, some folks talk about a family plan to make sure that every family member is on the same page. And it's really clear expectations. So you talk about how technology will fit within your routines and within your own family values. It might include how much screen time is allowed, again, including yourself. It might include when devices and which devices are allowed to be used at certain times. It might include which types of content is allowed, and there are lots of different ways as a caregiver to sort of oversee and put
Parental controls?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
You can put some parameters on the device about what your child is able to access. And so when those expectations are clear from the beginning, kids are less likely to see those limits as sudden or unfair or as reactive. So having that conversation early, setting those healthy limits early, really just sets an even playing field with everybody in the family. And it's just another thing that you guys are establishing within your household. It's nothing, nothing sudden or as a response to a problem. It is what it is.
Yeah. I feel like one thing that's coming to mind is when you're talking about speaking, you know, as a family, like with your partner or with other family members in the household, that everyone's on the same page, that conversations are also happening with littles if there are changes that are going to come. So they don't feel like, well, yesterday I was able to do this and today I can't. So having those conversations, I think, is so important. I also think sometimes we want to know, like, okay, but what matters the most? Is this versus this? Like, okay, tell me just what do you think? What boundaries matter most versus bed, like technology in the bedroom or with meals or before bed? Do you think it matters?
100%. And really, as somebody who is parenting kids of different developmental stages, this conversation didn't start until some of my kids were a little bit older. And so it's overwhelming to think of all of the things that I could have done to be a more responsive caregiver with regards to their use of screens. So having a place to start. So there are some things that really consistently show up in research and expert recommendations. One is keeping bedrooms screen-free, especially overnight. Devices in bedrooms are strongly associated with reduced sleep quality. So nighttime, okay, having a plan to keep screens off on the counter in the kitchen. Another is having screen-free family meals. So whether it's supper time, breakfast, wherever you find yourself naturally gathering with family members to share a meal, keeping screens away. We all know that they're distracting. We've all been out to dinner with somebody or in conversation with somebody, and they're checking their notifications and their screens, or they're trying to do two different things. So if we were to start somewhere, it would be bedtime and establishing a screen-free family meal time. Specific to bedtime, it is recommended to stop screens an hour before bedtime to let your body really settle into a restful state instead of that alert state that screens like to keep you in. It will help with sleep routines. It seems pretty straightforward and basic, but they really do have a surprising impact on family well-being when we're able to do those things.
Yeah. It's just making me think of like the parameters that you set make sense for kids' brain. Okay, I can use my tablet here. Now it's bedtime. I can't. So it helps with transitions, which we talk about so much here at First Five and in parenting classes. If you help your kids with transitions, I mean, you're going to avoid so many meltdowns. Now, I think this is a little hard probably to talk about because we tend to use as adults our phones for so many things. We're using it for work, we're using it for connections, for this, for that. So how important is modeling as adults, and do you have any tips?
Boy, it's huge. I really have to be mindful about, when I'm asking my daughter to turn off her show because it's time to read, um, while at the same time I'm checking my email on my phone. And so those boundaries and parameters that we talked about in terms of bedtime and meals definitely apply to you as the caregiver within the home. But really being reflective about the time that you're spending on your screen in front of your child. Modeling what it means to put it away. And sometimes you have to say it out loud, okay, I've been on my phone for kind of a while checking work, but it's not even my work hours. I'm going to put my phone away. So kind of narrating what you're doing for younger children can help really make the choices you're making very clear to them. You're modeling healthy habits, you're modeling healthy boundaries, and you do that both by what you do and by what you say. The idea is for kids to see adults practicing balance, whether it's with work, with recreation, with screens. Within that bigger picture, they really, hopefully, they see how technology fits within their life and doesn't take over what that human connection is supposed to play.
Thank you, Jen. I think one thing that's so important, and I love the way that we're framing these topics, is like nobody's perfect, but it is helpful to have some jumping off points or some tips. And you might not do them one day and do them all perfect the next day, but it's just about the little tips and the little habits that you start implementing. So thank you so much. Now, Heidi, managing conflict in the moment might not be as easy as it sounds. And obviously, for every kid and every family, it's going to look different. But do you have some tips on what to do when there's a meltdown happening? Maybe because a tablet or something was taken away or time was put in place. What do you suggest?
Well, and I will say that this is a really common thing in my home. It happens all the time. So I know that the things that I say can be easier said than done, and in the moment it can be really challenging. So I want to acknowledge that for everybody out there. But really, one of the most important things when it comes to, I mean, it's kind of across the board, whether the meltdown is around, you know, not being able to wear the hat they want to wear or whatever, or if it's around screen times. When your kiddo's melting down and big feelings are happening, the most important thing and powerful thing that we can do as caregivers is to stay calm ourselves, and try to be that calm, regulated state that they are needing in that moment, that they can almost borrow from, when they're needing that. And then especially with screen time, because we know, we're thinking about the fact that there are components of screens that are, impacting our kiddos at a biological level. So we need to understand that these are really big transitions, and it's very understandable for our kiddos to have meltdowns around them. So we want to acknowledge those feelings. We can say things like, I know you're having a lot of fun and it's really hard to stop, but mom wants to play with you now, or we're going to go do some playtime outside and we can maybe watch TV later, or so kind of have some transition language that's acknowledging that I know you were having fun, I know that this is hard for you, and then kind of identifying, like, we're going to get to go do this now. So that kind of, that empathy, it doesn't mean that you're changing the rule and that you're not adhering to the plan, but it's showing empathy and that you understand that this is a tough transition. And at the same time, keeping that calm, regulated state for them. Transitions, just like Jen was talking about a family plan, a lot of times having a really consistent plan is so helpful because our kiddos know then what to expect. And so the same goes for transitions. If they know what to expect, if they know what's coming, it can really help smooth that transition. So if you give them a warning and say, okay, you have 5 minutes left and then the iPad or the TV is going off, or you have 2 minutes left, that gives them time to sort of mentally prepare for the transition. And also they know it's coming. And so that can feel a little bit, it's not like that's going to completely eliminate, any meltdowns that happen, but it can definitely help ease that transition, help them feel a little bit, what it is that it's helping them feel a little bit safer through that transition, because they at least knew what to expect. So those are some things that can be really helpful.
Okay, so now how do you hold boundaries without escalating? I mean, you mentioned it, trying to keep calm as a caregiver, but do you have anything else? Because I feel like that's the hardest thing, when when all of the things aren't working and you're trying to hold the boundaries and trying to keep a meltdown from escalating even further, what do you suggest?
Well, and this has been mentioned already. This word has been mentioned several times, so it kind of gives you an idea of how important it is. But really, the key is consistency. So if children learn that arguing and negotiating will eventually get them what they want, like longer screen time, things like that, they're going to keep pushing. But if we as parents and caregivers can stay calm and stay predictable and stay consistent in what, the plan, the family plan is, or the rule that was set for that particular like screen time, instance, then that's when kiddos that, they'll gradually understand that the limit is firm. And also, kind of going back to that last question, when you stay consistent, it does help kiddos. They feel a lot safer, and they're a lot more willing to sort of go with the flow, even if it's not their favorite thing, when they know what to expect, when they know what's coming, and they know it's a boundary I don't like, but I know it's coming. So they're usually going to be a little bit more, that's going to go a little bit smoother. But it can also help to redirect kids towards another activity. So like I mentioned before, sort of identifying, 2 more minutes, or the screen's going to be shut off now, but we're going to go outside and do some, playtime, or let's go play a game, or, we're going to sit down and have a meal together as a family. So kind of identifying that this screen is going off, but this is going to be the next activity started. Lets them have something that they know or can look forward to, to transition into. And so that can kind of help smooth some of that, and, hopefully keep the escalation either at a minimum or no escalation at all. So.
Now, what would you say, and again, probably family to family, but if you have tips, what if we're talking about an older child and maybe they're sneaking in devices, or they're pushing back, and, a teenager pushing back is going to look a lot different than, a 5-year-old pushing back, maybe. So what would you say to that?
Oh boy. Yeah, that's one I haven't had in my home yet. And so I'm not looking forward to that trend, but I know it's coming. No, but it's a great question. I think the main thing that we need to remember for our older kiddos is that the focus really starts to shift more towards trust and responsibility. So instead of only enforcing the rules, the parents can start, it's a good idea for parents to start involving the kiddos in creating like shared agreements about technology use. That way, the kids feel like they have some autonomy and ownership in what the protocols are, and understand, and hopefully, and in those conversations, the conversation about trust, and that, you have ownership in this plan now. So there is a level of trust and responsibility on their shoulders to honor the plan that they helped build. So it's a good time to have the conversation, and it's a good kind of practice for kids. But then, if inevitably, I'm sure it happens, if a child sneaks a device or breaks that agreement, then the conversation becomes about rebuilding that trust. And so sometimes that might mean, there's temporary limits. So, maybe screen time, if there's a daily allotment, maybe that's reduced or taken away altogether for a certain period of time. But the bigger goal is really helping them learn how to manage technology responsibly. Because like we've mentioned before, it's not going away. It's in schools. It's, it's used for, we as adults we could not get by without, having use of technology. And so it's not going away. It's really about kind of coaching and guiding on how to manage these things responsibly and in a healthy way.
Yeah, thank you. And I think something that we talk about a lot here is age appropriate consequences. So like you said, involving them, but then also having that conversation in your household about what do age appropriate consequences to certain things look like. This conversation has been, I think, such a great place to start thinking about screen time and your family. And I know it can feel daunting, but a great place to start with your partner, with other adults in the household, is really having a family plan, like Jen mentioned, and we've talked about consistency and keeping things. Understanding that you're not always going to be perfect, but you can have tips to go off of. Some questions that I would prompt you to ask yourself and your partners in the household to really think about screen time could be, when is a child ready for their own device? What conversations should happen before giving access? How do we teach responsibility instead of just controlling use? These are some great starting off questions that you can have amongst yourselves, with your family, with your friends, so that you guys can kind of brainstorm a little bit. To finish off, Jen and Heidi, do you have any final thoughts on this topic? Anything else you want to share?
I just want to say one thing that we haven't really mentioned, but to close off to talk about it, you talked about conversations that should happen before giving a child access. Definitely expect hard conversations. Caregivers need to talk about online safety, privacy, and, respectful communication. Kids need to understand that not everything online is always accurate or safe. And they should always feel comfortable telling an adult if something makes them uncomfortable. So really that trust and responsibility is embedded in many different components here. The ultimate goal is helping kids develop self-regulation, and sometimes that means gradually giving them more responsibility while guiding them in how to make good choices. So you're very much a part of that process as a caregiver.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's something that, yeah, we didn't even scratch the surface on online safety and what could happen through a phone. So starting these conversations young and building that trust is so, so important.
I think one thing that I just sort of wanted to mention is that screen time is such a challenging topic, I think, for parents and caregivers because while we know there are some risks to having, unhealthy, maybe, too much screen time, whatever that means. And sometimes we don't even know what that means. And, there's a lot of information out there about it. And a lot of differing opinions. And so it can feel really confusing. But at the end of the day, the other piece about screen time is that we're all really busy. We all feel really overloaded and exhausted. And sometimes it feels like it's a moment where we can get a quick break to go do some, and it's not even a break for us as caregivers. It's like, oh, I want to just do the dishes really quick. And in order for that to happen, if I put the kiddo on, Bluey on the TV, then I can get the dishes done quickly. And so it's just, it feels like a tool, and unfortunately a pretty effective tool for a lot of caregivers. And so I want to just kind of acknowledge that piece that, I think it brings a lot of shame also for caregivers because they worry if they're using it too much as a tool. And so just kind of acknowledge that it's a really hard conversation. It's a really hard thing to be stressing about constantly. You're always wondering if you're doing the right thing, if you're, doing some long-term damage or something by having your kiddo on screens too much. I mean, these are the thoughts that really, the realistic thoughts that come up in our minds. And so this conversation isn't in any way, we don't want this to be taken as, an opportunity for caregivers to further judge themselves or criticize their, techniques or anything like that. It's information only. It's hopefully something that you can, use and take home to maybe help build a family plan or something like that, but to also acknowledge that you're doing a great job, you're doing the best that you can, and that we do, as caregivers, we do need to utilize the tools that we have available to us. And I think somebody mentioned this earlier. Some days are better than others. Some days we're probably feeling great about what our screen time habits are in our home, and other days not so much, and that's okay. But to keep trying, keep learning, keep trying to develop these healthy habits. I mean, that's the best that we can do. And so don't be too hard on yourself. And yeah, just understand, acknowledge that it all is just kind of it can be a really challenging topic, and really hard to not kind of have those really critical thoughts around it. So
have some patience with yourselves. Beautifully said, Heidi. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on this episode of Nurturing Humboldt. Heidi and Jen are part of our team of facilitators who go out into the community and put on amazing parenting classes. So feel free to check us out on Instagram, on Facebook to see upcoming classes where you can meet the experts behind these conversations. And by experts, I mean, we are trying our best. Thank you, ladies, so much.
thank you.
Thanks so much, Karina.